Okay, so we are moving on from the sad stories of Numbers. Um, and we've been mostly, the drawing we've been looking at for a long time, like months, has been just the sad face of Numbers, the sad face of Mount Sinai, and then the sad face of the wilderness before. So these are, remember, this is all the wilderness period. After Egypt, they enter into the wilderness for a long, long time. And that's not going to change really until we get into Joshua, when they go into the promised land. So the people grumbled beforehand for food and water and other things. God was gracious to them. He gives them the Torah as the part of his covenant, bringing them into a covenant relationship with himself. And how do they thank Yahweh? The whole golden calf debacle incident. And then, he gets them into good shape by giving them the rest of the Torah, and then they head right out into the wilderness again for this huge collection of sad face, rebellion, grumbling stories. So, just first off, if you were, well, actually, you kind of know this. If you're Yahweh in these stories, how are you feeling about the covenant people right now? Feeling. Not necessarily acting, but feeling. What's that? Not so good, yes? Totally disappointed, angry, justifiably angry, right? He brings justice on them. I mean, this has been like the biggest downer in the whole Torah, and it's been months. Months, you guys, months. So this is the point at which you would wonder, like, man, is he really going to hang on with these people? And these stories that we're going to read today about a strange pagan sorcerer named Balaam are in many ways an answer to and a reflection back on this whole deal, and these stories reveal a huge part of Yahweh's character towards his people. And they are funny and bizarre and surprising stories. So, Numbers 22. Let's just see what happens. Oh yeah, I need to put the map up there. Perfect. So this is the map we've been looking at. Zoom in. Why can't I zoom in? I can't zoom in for some reason. That's bizarre. It's just a little move of my two fingers. Look what's going on here. Okay, there we go. So we've been cruising up here. Remember last week they went on that highway, and there were all the other Canaanite nations. They were like, get out of here. We don't want you here. You can't drink our water. That kind of thing. So they wandered their way up into this region up here. Modern day Jordan is ancient Moab. Numbers 22. So then the Israelites, they traveled to the plains of Moab, and they camped along the Jordan across from Jericho. So again, I'll just put my little cursor circling Jericho there. You can see it. So they're right in this region here. Now they're going to stay here in this basic area for a long time through all the rest of, no, not a long time, for a lot of pages. It's actually not that much time, but it's a lot of pages. Moses' speeches that make up Deuteronomy are all delivered in this area. So here they are, camped here. Now, Balak, son of Zippor, he's the king of this whole region called Moab here, that's modern-day Jordan. Balak, son of Zippor, he saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was terrified because there were so many people. Indeed, Moab was filled with dread because of the Israelites. Now, does that ring any bells? Israel shows up, lots of people, pagan, Canaanite, king gets afraid because there's so many of them, filled with dread. What's echoing in our minds right here? The Exodus story of Egypt. There's a lot of intentional narrative parallels between this story and the way the story begins in Exodus right here. You have a king afraid of Israel. They have experienced the blessing of Abraham, be fruitful and multiply. And Pharaoh is going to make 3 attempts to wipe them out. He's going to try and wipe them out through slave driving, through telling the midwives to kill the firstborn, and then eventually throwing them into the river. 3 attempts he's going to make. And this story is also about a pagan king who's afraid of how numerous the Israelites are, and he also is going to make 3 attempts to bring doom on the covenant people. Verse 4. So the Moabites, they said to the elders of Midian, which is another tribal group that was living in this region off the map here to the side, this whole horde is going to lick up everything around us like an ox licks up the grass of the field. So Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, he sent messengers to summon Balaam, son of Beor, who was at Pethor near the river in his native land. Now, when you hear Balaam, you should think, boo, it's one of these moments here. Here's what's interesting. So this guy, this is his first appearance onto the biblical storyline. He's going to appear once more in a few more chapters, and he's a strange man. He's a strange man. He's a sorcerer. He's a Canaanite sorcerer. And here's what's even more interesting is, when was this? 60s, 1960s? Not far from this region, up in the hills of this region, archaeologists constantly doing what they do. There was always there's a little town called Deir Allah, not far from this hill where they're camping out. It's about 8 miles in. And they found this house structure, and then they discovered it was actually some kind of ancient temple. And, of course, they find all kinds of cool ancient texts and so on. So this text that you're looking at here, these two pictures of it, and then here's a picture of it in the museum that it kept. It's called the Deir Allah inscription. And right here at the center is this long poem. And lo and behold, who is this a poem about? It's called The Misfortunes of the Book of Balaam, son of Beor. A divine seer was he. He talks like Yoda. I don't know why that's... Anyway. And it's this whole... it dates to about the time of David, and it's this whole story about this oracle, this night vision that he has, and the gods are warning him that they're going to bring destruction and plague on the people of Moab, and so he warns them and so on. Anyway, it was super fascinating. So this guy, he was the whole point is he was a known figure. The memory of his fame survives both in the Bible, but even in the ruins outside of the Bible as well. So he's an ambiguous figure. That's the whole point here. He is in touch with Yahweh, but he's in touch with a lot of different gods and spiritual beings. And so that's what makes him such an ambiguous figure. Okay, let's keep going. So Balak said, "A people has come up out of Egypt, and they're covering the face of the land, and they have settled right next to me. Now come, put a curse on these people. They are too powerful for me. Perhaps then I'll be able to defeat them and drive them out of the country. For I know that those whom you bless are blessed, and those whom you curse are cursed." Now, is there any other story from earlier in the Torah resonating, ringing in your ears right here? Yeah, this promise to Abraham, way back when. Abraham? There's no book of Abraham. I just started typing Abraham's name. What does that even mean? So this is Genesis 12. the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your relatives, your father's house, to the land I'll show you. I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you. I'll make your name great. You'll be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you. Whoever curses you, I will curse. So God is going to mark out and protect this covenant family for the purpose of fulfilling this promise to bring blessing to all the nations of the earth. Again, it's not that he's pro one people. He's pro his covenant promises to bring blessings to all the nations of the earth. So already we have an echo here, all the way back to Genesis chapter 12. So this story is all about, Yahweh's chosen his people, and his people behave horribly. But remember, does Yahweh's covenant promises to bring blessing to all of the nations, does that hinge on Israel being obedient or disobedient? No. Like, he's just going to fulfill his promise no matter what. The ride might be miserable for Israel if they disobey, so they should not do that. But one way or another, whether it's through their good or whether it's through their evil, God is going to fulfill his promises. And so that's a big part of what's happening in this story. It's God remaining faithful to his promises to Abraham, even though Israel has been utterly unfaithful in the story so far. Okay. Verse 7. So the elders of Moab and Midian left, taking with them their fee for divination. Big bucks in the sorcery business. Big money here. When they came to Balaam, they told him what Balak said. Spend the night here, Balaam said to them, and I'll bring you back the answer that Yahweh gives me. It's just, there's no explanation given for how he knows about Yahweh. There's no explanation given for, does he think Yahweh is the best or something like that? There's just no, he's just a pagan sorcerer. And Yahweh is one among the many gods that he gets in touch with for a handsome price. So the Moabite princes stayed with him. God came to Balaam and asked, who are these men with you? Presumably at night or in a vision, since that's how Balaam seems to have had his experiences. Who are these men who are with you? God said. Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab, has sent me this message. A people that has come out of Egypt covers the face of the land. Now come, put a curse on them for me. Perhaps then I will be able to fight them and drive away. But God said to Balaam, don't go with them. You must not put a curse on those people because they are blessed. Now just stop, think through the months that we just spent right here, and just, what? So again, this ought to startle us, that when it comes to dealing with the covenant people himself, Yahweh, he brings justice and he brings discipline on them in the wilderness and so on. But when it comes to Israel's role in bringing about blessing to the nations as the birth family of the Messiah and so on, he gets really protective of his covenant plan. Does that make sense? The covenant plan to bring the Messiah is really a big deal, and so they are blessed. You wouldn't know that from reading these stories here, but that's kind of the deal. I suppose it would be like if Roman's super crabby and being super disobedient all day long, but then if we go to the playground and somebody gangs up on him, that's it. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if he's been crabby all day long. I'm going to step in and protect my boy. I don't know. you get the point. You get the point. Except Roman is not going to give birth to the Messiah. It's kind of a little bit different of an analogy there. So anyway, maybe that's a bad analogy. Verse 13. The next morning, Balaam got up, and he said to Balak's princes, go back to your own country. Yahweh's refused to let me go with you. So the Moabite princes, they returned to Balak, and they said, wow, Balaam, he refused to come with us. Then Balak sent other princes, more numerous and more distinguished than the first. Balaam had some clout right? He can really attract attention. They came to Balaam and they said, "This is what Balak, son of Zippor, says. Don't let anything keep you from coming to me. Listen, I'm going to reward you handsomely. I'm going to do whatever you say. So come on, just come put a curse on these people for me. Money talks, right?" But Balaam answered, "Even if Balak gave me his palace filled with silver and gold, I could not do anything great or small beyond the command of Yahweh, my God." Now the whole question, of course, is this just negotiating language, or is he really being presented as genuinely pious? You're being offered the kingdom here, basically. So, and as we'll see from next week, he's a character with extremely sly, mixed motives. But the story doesn't tell us one way or another if he's genuine or not here. He says, "Now stay here tonight, just like all the others did, and I'll find out what else Yahweh will tell me." That night, God came to Balaam and said, "Since these men have come to summon you, go with them, but do only what I tell you." So Balaam got up in the morning, he saddled his donkey, and he went with the princes of Moab. Verse 22, and God was angry as he went, and the angel of Yahweh stood in the road to oppose him. Did you catch that? What just happened? Yeah, what just happened? Yeah, something happened. I just want you to pay attention that something happened, at least. Something is very bizarre here. God said, "Go with them, but do only what I tell you." Balaam got up in the morning, he goes, and then all of a sudden, God's angry at him. Now, I'm just curious, the NIV, I think, correctly has, God was angry with him as he went, or when he went. Other translations? I know there's some others. Because he went, yes. Now that really creates a problem, doesn't it? Because we just told him to go, and now he's told them he's angry that he went. So I recognize this is a problem. Just so you know, the stacks of Numbers commentaries that I have upstairs have a different view for every commentary that I have a stack of, by the way. So one very long-standing explanation is that what we're looking at here is a little literary theme in the story. The way that the biblical authors went about making their books was not just by writing at whole cloth, but by adopting materials that were pre-existing and weaving them into new wholes. And so if you look at verse 21, Balaam got up in the morning, he saddled his donkey, and he went with the princes of Moab. Let's see. Yes, he went with the princes of Moab. Go down to verse 35. The angel of the Lord said to Balaam, "Go with the men, but speak only what I tell you." Exactly what Yahweh told him before. So Balaam went with the princes of Balak. You're like, well, yes, he did that a long time ago, right? So what some people think is actually that verse 21 originally continued with verse 35, and that this story about the talking donkey, which is precisely what's between those two sections, is a little quilt piece that the author has sewn into the story. And what we're seeing in this little surface tension in the story is actually a little bit of literary seam, a place where the sewing of the two stories came together. Does that make sense? So kind of like, I don't know, like on my sweatshirt, you can see the two cloths, and then you can see they've been woven together, and so it's a little surface tension in the story. That's a very prominent explanation. I think it's compelling for a number of reasons. The other one that is also, I think, compelling is that the verb used, when he went, I think there's the phrase when he went could be translated two ways. It's a present tense action. In other words, the narrative's not continuing. It's saying Balaam got up to go, and as he was going, God got angry with him. Well, what happened? What happened inside of Balaam that God got angry with him? The story doesn't tell you, but as we're going to see as we go on in the story, there's something funky about Balaam's motives that Yahweh thinks he needs to confront. So I don't know the answer to this question, but those are the two main explanations. We're looking at a literary theme, like on my sweatshirt, or that something that the narrative isn't telling us happened inside of Balaam, and you have to keep reading to figure it out. Moving on. So, one way or another, something happened with Balaam. God gets angry. And so the angel of the Lord stood in the road to oppose him. Now Balaam was riding on his donkey, and his two servants were with him. Now when the donkey saw the angel of Yahweh, now which presumably means who did not see the angel of Yahweh? Balaam. Now what's funny is that he's going to open all his oracles by introducing himself, Balaam, the one who sees. He's the seer, the divine seer. And even, I think, right here, even in the Balaam inscription found at Deir Allah, he's introduced as a divine seer. And this whole story about the donkey is how he can't see what's standing right in front of him, what Yahweh is doing. Anyways, it's irony in the story. So the donkey saw this angel of Yahweh standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand. She turned off the road, the donkey, into a field, and Balaam beat her to get her back on the road. Why does it say her? Why doesn't it just say it? Donkey. Oh, does it say it? Yeah, it should. I'm going to say it. So Balaam beat it and get it back on the road. Then the angel of Yahweh stood in a narrow path between two vineyards, big vineyard walls on both sides. So can you get the picture here? It's this little corridor down to some vineyards. When the donkey saw the angel of Yahweh, it pressed close to the wall, crushing Balaam's foot against it. Oh, so this is a regionally known figure of great reputation and fame, and his foot's getting crushed by a donkey. You're supposed to laugh. It's funny. His foot's getting crushed. Ow, ow. So he beat the donkey again. Then, and what's the donkey trying to do? It's protecting both of them, right? But yet he's like, oh, yeah, right, beating the donkey. Then the angel of Yahweh moved on ahead and stood in a very narrow place. There was no room to turn, either to the right or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of Yahweh, it laid down right under Balaam. He was angry. He began beating it with his staff. Then Yahweh opened the donkey's mouth, and it said to Balaam, "What are you doing?" Essentially. Right? "What have I done to you that you're beating me these, how many times? 3 times. So remember there's this whole little literary motif here of the 3 times. You had Pharaoh's 3 attempts to destroy the Israelites. You have Balak, king of Moab's 3 attempts to curse the Israelites. And then you have Balaam's 3 attempts or three times beating his donkey. A talking donkey. This is the second talking animal in the Bible. What's the first? It's on page 2. So talking snake. The narrative doesn't draw attention to it as remarkable. Balaam doesn't even apparently think it's that remarkable because he has a conversation with this animal. Is this connected to Balaam's role as a sorcerer, and so strange stories about this man and his adventures, are not to be surprising because he was a mysterious seer who heard and interacted with divine forces and so on. So the whole point is that the story is just deal with it. Just deal with it. You know what I mean? So I don't want to, well, I'll just speak personally. Like, these are stories that are just like, wow, that's remarkable. Don't do what C.S. Lewis rightly accuses many Westerners of when we read ancient texts. We assume ancient people were more stupid and more primitive than we are because we have dental technology and smartphones or something. And so talking animals are remarkable no matter what century you live in, right? And so it's not like, oh, of course they believe this. This is 2,000 years ago. Like, no, dude, this is remarkable. This is very strange, and he's a very odd man. So I don't want to, I just want to leave you with that. I don't have any explanation for it except that remarkable things happen around this man. There you go. Balaam engages this donkey in conversation. You made a fool of me. Listen, if I had a sword in my hand, I'd kill you right now, of course. Who doesn't have a sword in their hand? Who does have a sword in their hand? And who's trying to save him from the sword? You get the irony of the story. You're supposed to laugh. The donkey then said to Balaam, listen, I'm your donkey. I'm your donkey. You've always ridden to this day. Have I been in the habit of doing this to you? Oh, it's a good point. It's a good point, he said. Then the Lord, Yahweh, opened whose eyes? Balaam's eyes. Then he saw the angel of Yahweh standing in the road with his sword drawn. So he bowed low and he fell face down. The angel of Yahweh asked him, why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I've come here to oppose you because your path is a reckless one before me. Okay, here's a little clue. Here's a little clue. Why is Yahweh angry with him? He's a heedless, reckless person. He's going to obey Yahweh, at least in these chapters, but next week, as we're going to see, he's going to lead the whole nation of Israel astray next week. So he's not a good guy. So why did Yahweh get angry with him as he was on the way? Something's going on inside of this guy that's not right. Listen, the donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times, and if she hadn't turned away, I would have killed you by now, and I would have spared the donkey. Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned. I didn't realize you were standing here on the road to oppose me. Now, listen, if you're displeased, I'll go back if you don't want me to go. The angel of Yahweh said to Balaam, go with the men, but speak only what I tell you. So this whole little narrative interlude is, first of all, it's a little funny. It's a funny story. There's 3 times that Balaam cannot see. He can't see what's truly going on in front of him. And so 3 times he acts out in violence, but in reality, each time it's the donkey that's protecting his life. And then eventually he does come to see. So this is also a little story, I think, that's almost has a parable-like quality for the larger story that we're in. Because what can the king of Moab not see? Who's the king of Moab trying to beat with 3 curses he's going to attempt, right? And why is he trying to beat Israel with 3 curses? Because he cannot see that Yahweh's promise stands with these people. And so it's this kind of irony where Balaam, in this little story, is playing the role of Balak, the king of Moab, in the larger set of stories. Isn't this brilliant? It's good storytelling. That's what this is. Anyway, verse 35. So Balaam went with the princes of Balak. When Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him at the Moabite town at the Arnon border at the edge of his territory. And Balak said to Balaam, didn't I give you an urgent summons? Sheesh, why didn't you come to me? Do you think I'm not able to pay you? Well, I've come to you now, Balaam said. But can I say just anything? I must only speak what God puts in my mouth. So Balaam went with Balak to Kiriath Huzot, and Balak sacrificed cattle and sheep, and he gave some to Balaam and the princes who were with him. The next morning, Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal. Baal was the chief, or Baal was the chief national deity of Moab. And from there he saw part of the people. So he's over on a hill overlooking Israel. Balaam said, "Build me 7 altars right here. Prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams for me." Balak did as Balaam said, and the 2 of them offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Then Balaam said to Balak, "Stay here beside your offering while I go aside. Perhaps Yahweh will come and meet with me. Whatever he reveals to me, I will tell you." Then he went off to a barren height, and God met with him. And Balaam said, "I have prepared 7 altars, and on each altar I have offered a bull and a ram." Yahweh put a message in Balaam's mouth and said, "Go back to Balak and give him this message." So he went back and found him standing beside his offering with all the princes of Moab. Big pomp and ceremony here. Then Balaam uttered his oracle. "Balak brought me from Aram, the king of Moab from the eastern mountains. Come," he said, "curse Jacob for me. Come now, denounce Israel." How can I curse those whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce those whom Yahweh has not denounced? From rocky peaks I see them, from the heights I view them. I see a people who live apart. Any other translations of that line there? Alone. And they do not consider themselves, or they are not numbered, one among the nations. So he sees there's this unique people here. Who can count the dust of Jacob? Who could number even a quarter, a fourth part of Israel? Oh, let me die the death of the righteous, and may my end be like that of Israel's, like theirs. So, did you get the poem? Did you get the flow of the poem? I can't curse them. God hasn't cursed them. And I see them. They're very unique. And then it's like there's something special, unique here about what God's doing here with these people. Oh, man, may my end be like theirs. Verse 11, Balak said to Balaam, "What have you done to me? I brought you to curse my enemies. You've done nothing but bless them." You can just see Genesis 12, right? Just dripping off the page, right? He answered, "Well, don't I have to speak what Yahweh puts in my mouth?" Balak said to him, well, let's come to another place where you can see them. You'll only see a part of them, but not all of them. And from there, curse them for me. So he took them to the field of Zophim on the top of Pisgah, and there he built 7 more altars. And he offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Balaam said to Balak, "Okay, stay here beside your offering while I meet with him over there." Yahweh met with Balaam, put a message in his mouth, and said, "Go back to Balak and give him this message." So he went to him and found him standing beside his offering with the princes of Moab, and Balak asked him, What did Yahweh say? Then he uttered his oracle. "Arise, Balak, and listen. Hear me, son of Zippor. God is not a human that he would lie. He's not a son of man," which is a Hebrew poetic way of saying human, "that he should change his mind. Is he going to speak and then not act? Is he going to promise and then not fulfill? I have received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot change it." Now, of course, in the story right now that we're in, this is the same theme of, God's blessing them. But just stop and think back over these chapters. So, will God go back on his promise to Abraham? Can even Israel's covenant failure and faithlessness cause Yahweh to go back on his promise to bless all the nations through them? It cannot. It cannot. So these words also become this reflective commentary on all that's come before. Verse 21, "No misfortune is seen in Jacob, no misery observed in Israel." really? Really? Isn't that interesting? Well, fine here. So again, as I reflect back, like Roman is being super jerk mode, whatever, at home, but we get to the playground and other kids are threatening him, like I'm gonna step in. Yahweh, their God, is with them. The shout of a king is among them. Yahweh is their king. He's with them. God brought them out of Egypt. They have the strength of a wild ox, or some of your translations have. God is for them like the horns of a wild ox. Think a big bull with big horns. That's the image here. There is no sorcery against Jacob, no divination against Israel. It will now be said of Jacob and of Israel, look what God has done. These people, they rise like a lioness. They rouse themselves like a lion that does not rest until he devours his prey and drinks the blood of its victims. Not good news. Not good news. It's like a ravenous lion. That's who these people are. Balak said to Balaam, well, don't curse them at all, nor bless them at all. And Balaam answered, what? Didn't I tell you? I have to do whatever Yahweh says. Then Balak said to Balaam, that was the second time. What do we come up on? Third time. Come, let me take you to another place. Perhaps it'll please God to let you curse them for me from over there. Balak took Balaam to the top of Peor, and he overlooked the wasteland. Balaam said, build me 7 altars, prepare 7 bulls, 7 rams. Balak did as Balaam had said. He offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Now, when Balaam saw that it pleased Yahweh to bless Israel, he didn't resort to sorcery as at the previous 2 times. So it doesn't say in the other text about how Balaam went about his work. We know one of the most common ways was called, it's one of the most ridiculous words, called extispacy. And it's where you cut open an animal and you pour its guts out onto a big clay circular disc, and then the shape of how the guts fall onto the disc are omens and signs. And then you learn this code language as a sorcerer for how to decode how the liver falls and that kind of thing, extispacy. So, was he doing extispacy for these first 2? That's weird. And Yahweh is still talking to this guy. But anyway, he doesn't need to resort to his potions or extispacy as at other times. He turned his face to the desert, verse 2. When Balaam looked out and he saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, who came upon him? The Spirit. The Spirit of God. So the whole point is something's unique here. If he was a channel for God's blessing the first time, something really significant is about to happen. Because he's no sorcery, and now he is speaking under the motivation and influence of God's own creative spirit. So he uttered his oracle. These are 2 of the most important poems in the entire Hebrew Bible, by the way. The oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle of one whose eyes see clearly. Right? You kind of chuckle to yourself. The oracle of one who hears the words of God, who sees a vision of the Almighty, who falls prostrate, whose eyes are opened. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, and your dwelling places, O Israel. This is all metaphor. This whole poem is saturated in metaphor. So you have the tents. Here's Israel camped with tents. Like valleys, they spread out like gardens beside a river. So he depicts this big river valley, and then on both sides, are hills, and on the flat bottom are the tents of Israel. And then he likens them to aloe plants planted by Yahweh, like cedars beside the waters. Water will overflow from his buckets. and his seed will be in abundant water. Okay, warning here. This little poem here is extremely dense Hebrew and uses a lot of very strange and unusual words, and our English translations are going to differ a lot here. And it's mostly because the Hebrew poetry is extremely difficult. But if you track with the metaphors, it's pretty easy to get. So the picture here is of a peaceful river valley. Come on, how's that, right? That's a nice river valley, right? And it goes around the corner there. And so you have all the camps and the tents here, but then they're likened to trees. They're like abundant trees in this great river valley. And then we get a little picture of a guy who's carrying buckets of water. And the word used for buckets, it's these, well, I want to make sure everybody can see here. It's this kind of deal here, where you carry it like this. You know these buckets here? It's like the dual. The word for bucket is this dual, two buckets, okay? So here's one of these guys getting water, from the camp and so on. So water is overflowing from buckets, and then the metaphor says, his seed will be in or among the abundance of waters. You guys with me here? Verse 7. So the idea is that they have so much water, it's just overflowing out the sides. It's jostling along or something as the guy carries it. And then this overflow of water represents this overabundance of seed, which is the word for offspring. So the abundance of people. Now, if you think back to, and we already know this story is alluding back to the earlier chapters in Genesis. Can you think of another story in Genesis where the coming of the seed was really important? Or the offspring? Even back for Abraham, Genesis 3, the seed of the woman coming to crush the head of the snake. So we're blessing, it's all coming together here. Okay, so their seed, the promised seed of Abraham, will be among the abundant waters. His king will be greater than, and what do we have there? Greater than who? Agag. Agag. And his kingdom will be exalted. Now forget about Agag, whatever that means. Who are we talking about right now? First we were talking about tents, and then trees, and then water, and then seed, and now what are we talking about? King, Jesus. So a good instinct, right? So we're talking about a king, a coming king. Does Israel have a king right now? No. So there's a king, apparently, among this abundant seed of Israel, and when this guy comes, he'll be greater than Agag, whatever that means. We'll talk about that, and he'll have a kingdom that's exalted. Okay. We'll come back to Agag. Let's keep going. God brings him out of Egypt. Now, I'm curious, how many of you actually have God brings or brought them out of Egypt? Okay, so some of you. I hate to do this to you, and I never want to undermine your confidence in your English translation, so that means you have the New International Version sitting in front of you. And this all of verses 8 and down, when you see them or they, it is singular. It's him or his. So feel free to scratch it out and put in him or his. Because I think they're all a reference to this coming king. What the translators have done is they think that him or his is actually collectively referring to the whole people of Israel. And so they translate it as they or theirs. So just like in the previous poem, Yahweh's with his people. He brought them out of Egypt as a sign of his blessing and promises for them. Now he says, he looks, and he sees Israel, abundant waters, there's a seed among them, and all of a sudden in the poem that seed becomes a king, and he has a kingdom that's exalted over all, And then we just start hearing God brings the king out of Egypt. He is for him, God is for the king, like the horns or the strength of a wild ox. He will devour hostile nations and break their bones in pieces. His arrows will pierce them. Verse 9, like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? Any bells ringing there? This is a really obscure one. It's also another poem in Genesis. That little line right there about the lion. You remember at the end of Genesis, there was a poem. Actually, here, it's Genesis chapter 49. Jacob summoned his 12 sons and said, "Assemble everybody, that I may tell you what's going to happen to you in the days to come." Or in some translations, in the, come on, ESV, NRSV. Oh, nobody does it literally. Literally, oh wait, there's a little footnote. At the end of days is what it says in Hebrew. And he goes on to give these promises to all of the sons. Son number 4 is Judah. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. Judah is like a lion's whelp. From the prey of my son you have gone up. He crouches, he lies down like a lion. Like a lion, who dares rouse him up? It's identical. Balaam is apparently uttering the same exact line of poetry said of Judah. Now, here's what's significant here about this connection, is what's the very next line of the promise to Judah? It's the promise that the scepter, which is a metaphor, the royal scepter, will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, which is this is a dense Hebrew poem. This was like a year ago that we talked about this passage. Anyway, I think the NIV's got it right here when they say, until he comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nations will be his. In other words, Jacob is seeing down the line that from the line of Judah will come a ruler who will have a scepter. Judah will be the royal line until this king comes to whom that scepter truly belongs. And when he comes, all the nations will give their obedience to this king. Come on, come on. And so, Balaam is talking about how among the abundant seed of Israel, a king is coming whose kingdom will be exalted. And then he just straight up quotes a line from Genesis 49. Now, did Balaam say that line? Is this the author of the Pentateuch attaching a little sticky note saying, "Dear reader, remember this king that he's talking about is exactly the same line, it's the same guy as Genesis 49." I kind of think that line that is true, but whichever view, it doesn't matter. Then look at the next line. May those who bless you be blessed, and may those who curse you be cursed. Where does that come from? Yeah, it's just straight up quotation from Genesis chapter 12. And then Balak's anger burned against Balaam. Wouldn't yours too? Because you've now said that this people is unique, set apart among the nations. Yahweh is going to bless them, and actually a king is going to arise from this line. And then we have these two little comments that link the king that we've just learned about to the promise of Abraham, to the seed crushing the serpent, and to the king coming from the line of Judah, whose kingdom will be over all nations. What? Come on. It's too good. And it gets even better. Balak's anger burned against Balaam. He struck his hands together and said to him, "I've summoned you to curse my enemies, but you have blessed them these 3 times. Now leave, go home. I said I would reward you handsomely, but Yahweh has kept you from being rewarded." Balaam answered Balak, "Didn't I tell the messengers you sent me, even if Balak gave me his whole palace filled with silver and gold, I couldn't do anything of my own accord, good or bad, beyond the command of Yahweh. I must say only what Yahweh says. Now, I'm going back to my people, but come, let me warn you of what this people will do to your people in the days to come. Or you might have a little footnote that says literally in the end of days. Another curious little connection to Jacob's words in Genesis 49. And then this one comes right out of the gates. He uttered his oracle. Notice, is he being paid for this one? Is he being asked to give this one? No. The oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle of one whose eyes see clearly, chuckle, chuckle, the oracle of one who hears the words of God, who has knowledge from the Most High, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who falls prostrate, whose eyes are opened. It's a long introduction. I see him, but not right now. I behold him, but he's not near. A star will come up out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. Scepter is a poetic metaphor for king. He will crush the foreheads of Moab, the skulls of all the sons of Sheth. Edom will be conquered, Edom. Seir, his enemy, will be conquered, but Israel will go strong. A ruler will come out of Jacob and destroy the survivors of the city. So here's what's interesting, is that in the near term, just pretend there's no book here. Everything that he just said is going to connect with the stories of David in the books of Samuel. All those nations that were just named were Israel's closest neighbors that were the most violent towards Israel, and it's when David comes along that he's going to subdue most of these nations. And David is a king. Then Balaam saw Amalek, another nearby nation. This is the group that pounced on Israel when they came out of Egypt immediately. And he uttered his oracle. Amalek was the first among the nations, but he will come to ruin at last. Then he saw the Kenites, another group living in the desert near Israel. Your dwelling place is secure, your nest is set in rock, but you Kenites will be destroyed when Ashur takes you captive. Then he uttered his final oracle. Ah, who can live when God does this? Any other translations? That one. Who can survive? When God has, yes, so whether God wills it or whether he's actually done it, the Hebrew is very difficult. The whole point is, whoa, this is going to be so crazy when this all goes down. Ships will come from the shores of Kittim. Any other translations? Cyprus. They will subdue Ashur and Ever. Any other translations? Assyria and Ever. Nobody knows what that's talking about. And they too will come to ruin. So that last one particularly, there's about like 10 different suggestions as to what he's talking about. The whole point is that he is talking about the fall of Israel's enemies in the days to come. And so the big question that comes up out of this is, well, okay, is this just simply a prophecy of the kingship of David coming up here? And in one sense that's true, because some of the events that he talks about are actually events that take place when David's kingdom arises. But with all of these hints all the way back here to Genesis 3 and 12 and 49, it's clear that these promises do not get fulfilled. Do all nations give their allegiance to David in the eternal kingdom of God forever and ever, amen? And he defeats evil at its source. So, no. So David doesn't fulfill these promises. And so this is a unique thing about like Messianic prophecy in the Old Testament, is that there'll be some pieces that point forward and that seem to have been met in a particular figure, usually David. But then in the larger scene, there'll be other promises or prophecies that make it clear that David was just a pointer. His life and victories were just a pointer to the greater king who was yet to come. Does that kind of make sense a little bit? We'll talk about that more as we go on. Then Balaam got up and went home, and Balak went his own way. And there it is. That's the story. These bizarre chapters. Sorry, I know that went a little long, but I really like these chapters. So I think here's the takeaway that is significant. That was all kind of bizarre at the end there. But the biggest takeaway that I think is so remarkable is after all of this, Yahweh is still set on ultimately blessing his people to bring blessing to the nations through his people, and that his promise to save his world does not get canceled out because of the disobedience of his people. And this speaks really significant things about God's character, his promises, and his grace, really. Or as Paul says, does our disobedience cancel out God's righteousness? And he says, may it never be. This is what he says essentially in Romans chapter 3. So let's go with that thought. Let me close us in a word of prayer. Thank you for the gift of the Scriptures. Father, thank you that they remind us that we are small people living at one place and one time, and what you are doing in our world spans the lifetime of nations and families and millennia. Thank you for Jesus, the one in whom you have crushed the head of evil. Help us to live in light of that reality today, and to remember that your promise to us is certain in Jesus. So we thank you for him. We want to direct our attention towards him as we go from here today. So we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. Good stuff. See you guys next week.